Well, Director, welcome. Great to have you here today. Is this microphone, is it picking up okay? Okay, very good. Well, it's great to be with you today, and I appreciate your leadership at CISA, and proud to have worked with you over the years, and also be a proud member of the CISA Advisory Board now that I've left Congress. I'm a recovering politician. So.
Well, I should just say at the outset, thank you so much for your leadership, your partnership, and everything that you did to really pave the way for national cybersecurity, federal cybersecurity. And I'm very grateful that you're continuing to serve with CISA on our advisory committee. So thank you.
Absolutely, my honor. So I thought we'd begin by just talking about how CISA has evolved over the years. So you're about 5 years in now, and the role it plays in defending the .gov, and then its importance of working with the private sector, especially private sector critical infrastructure. I've often said that in government we have U.S. Cyber Command and working closely with NSA, and of course defending the DODIN and the .mil network. CISA is responsible for protecting the .gov network. And then you have really the .com world, including all private sector critical infrastructure, where all the bad things could happen. Right. But we don't have a director or a general in charge of protecting the .com world. And private sector really needs an effective government partner in order to really thrive and stay cyber secure. And that's, I know, really where CISA comes in. So I wanted to just kind of turn it over to you to talk about how CISA has matured and right. its role working with private sector.
Yeah, so I'm sure folks here have a little background, but I'll go ahead and give the thumbnail sketch anyway. So 4.5 years old, we were established in November of 2018, and we play probably 3 critical roles as relevant to this discussion. First, we were set up to be America's civilian cyber defense agency. As you mentioned, we have U.S. Cyber Command set up in 2009. So we play that role for the .gov as well as for critical infrastructure. The second role that we play is as the operational lead for federal cybersecurity, the .gov specifically, for what's called the FCEB, the Federal Civilian Executive Branch. And then finally, a role that was written into the CISA statute as the National Coordinator for Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience. And that's where we're working with the private sector as well as the sector risk management agencies to ensure that we have an ability to manage and reduce cyber risk. So altogether, our mission is to lead the national effort to understand, manage, and reduce risk to our cyber and our physical infrastructure that Americans rely on every hour of every day. And I'm sure everyone in this audience knows, but sometimes when I talk about critical infrastructure, people take it as a very technical term, but as I explain, it's really how we get our water and our power and our healthcare and our transportation and our communications. And so it really is the systems and networks that we rely upon every day. And as everybody knows, the vast majority of them are owned and operated by the private sector, which is why the role of CISA as a partnership agency and largely a voluntary agency, one that every day works to create trusted, valued partnerships through transparency, through responsiveness, through our expertise and all of our technical assistance. That's why it's so important for us to be able to create those types of engagements and relationships. And as I mentioned at the outset, Jim, your work for decades, really, in leading this, and the work that you did as part of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission with our friends Tom Fanning, who I think is going to be here later, and of course Chris Inglis and Suzanne Spalding, really set CISA up for success in a way that we would not have been able to evolve as we have over the last couple years. I'm coming up on my 2nd year here, and the things that have changed since the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and the recommendations that you all made, the NDAA in 2021 that instantiated, I think, almost half, maybe more than half of those recommendations, a lot of those went to CISA's benefit, and it's enabled us to really transform our ability to be America's civilian cyber defense agency, but also really to manage the .gov in a way that we never could have done before. And so the stark contrast from where we were during the days of SolarWinds to where we are now is really, I think, incredibly encouraging for the nation. Not to say there's not a lot more work to do, but I think we're on a really terrific path, and a lot of it is due to your leadership.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview. And how is the workforce doing, and the resources? Have been given enough resources from Congress? As you heard, I touched on the fact that there may have been an attempt to claw back some money, but under your leadership, I don't think there was much left to claw back. So,
Yeah, I think 2 million of the 650 million, so tiny,
Not bad.
tiny amount, not bad. We are very dedicated to being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and we have, as you know, really benefited from incredible bipartisan support, both from you, Chairman Thompson, Congressman Katko. I mean, it's been pretty terrific, and that has continued, frankly, under Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Swalwell. Certainly, we have continued to get the support that we need. With respect to the budget, as you mentioned, the first time the FY24 budget was the first time where the president's budget request was actually over the FY23 enacted, where we had, I think, about 300 plus million more than the last budget request. And in the hack mark that came out yesterday, we had more than the FY23 enacted, a little less than the FY24 budget. So again, we'll be about a $3 billion agency, which is about $1 billion more since I came in. And I think we've been doing what the Congress would hope we would do with that, which is helping to defend the nation in cyber, build the trusted partnerships, and then perhaps most importantly, because at the end of the day, people matter more than anything, ensuring that we are bringing on the right talent. And I'm really proud that over the past 2 years, we've hired almost 1,200 people on the team, which is pretty incredible, and some really, really amazing talent. And we've done it in creative ways. Obviously, we're using the cyber talent management system, but we've also built a culture, I think, that attracts some of the best talent. We have flexibility in how we manage folks. We provide fantastic opportunities to work across the country with partners in industry at the state and local level. And we have cool new programs. We just announced today another one of our cyber innovation fellows, where we bring in folks from the private sector for 2 or 3 days a week. They come in for about 6 months, and they work with us as a CISA teammate. They bring that expertise from the private sector, and then they bring back to the private sector what CISA is, how we operate, the value add, and we can share each other's best practices. So we are excited to learn from each other, and we're looking for interesting ways to continue to collaborate. But it's been a terrific journey as we build the workforce, and I've been super proud. The last thing I'd say is the field is actually, I think, one of the most exciting things about CISA, and that's the growth of our cybersecurity advisors, our cybersecurity state coordinators, our protective security advisors, who are out in every state working with on the front lines of industry, but also working with state and local, working with election officials. And that high touch that we have in a voluntary partnership where we can provide free services is really magical when you can get it working right. And so I'm excited about continuing to grow and build that workforce as well.
Excellent. Good answer. Thank you for the update on that. And can you talk about your view of the cyber threat landscape as it stands right now? I know that there had been some high-profile cases where CISA, working with federal partners like FBI, had real value add with combating things like ransomware and such. But can you give us an overview of the cyber kind of threat landscape that we're facing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, it really is these types of crimeware, ransomware threats that we worry a lot about, we work on. The Joint Ransomware Task Force that came out of the CISA legislation that you mentioned, we've stood that up. We asked FBI to join us as a co-lead. We've implemented the ransomware vulnerability warning pilot, which helps us to reduce the prevalence of ransomware around the country for everybody that signs up for our vulnerability scanning. And we've also put in place the pre-ransomware notification initiative, which is one of the really exciting things based on the trusted relationships that we've developed with researchers and with threat intel partners and industry infrastructure teams. Will get tips on ransomware being deployed but not yet activated. And so based on the relationships that we have in the field with some of those field forces, we will call to let them know you have ransomware on your system, and that sometimes, in many of the cases, prevented them from actually having their worst day. And my friend Jamil Farshi, who's the CISO of Equifax, actually did a good post on this. And so things like that, where we can use our trusted partnerships that we have and then use our field forces to do the notifications and make a real difference to prevent a ransomware attack, that's a terrific day for what we can do at CISA. So the day-to-day is ransomware, but at the end of the day, the threat that I am most concerned about is China. And you only need to look at the intelligence community's annual threat assessment, which very clearly talks about the threat from China in terms of their cyber capability. And I would recommend that everybody take a look at it, because it was a pretty stark warning. And I think it has not gotten enough attention, frankly. And I think it's critical that anybody who owns a business, large or small, and certainly if you're a critical infrastructure owner or operator, you take a look at that and start thinking about the improvements that you need to make, not just to your cybersecurity, but also to your resilience. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit about how I see those two things complementary but slightly different. But on China, the IC assessment talks about in the event of a conflict, China will almost certainly consider aggressive cyber operations against U.S. critical infrastructure, to include rail, to include oil and gas pipelines, and is almost certainly capable of disrupting that infrastructure. Folks will know that a couple weeks ago, Microsoft put out a blog about an actor, a PRC cyber actor, which they called Volt Typhoon. I have no idea how these things get names, but Volt Typhoon, and talked about some of the intrusions that they are seeing in critical infrastructure. We then published a cybersecurity advisory with our NSA, FBI, and Five Eyes teammates that talked about the threat from Chinese cyber actors against critical infrastructure. And I would ask folks to take a look at that if you have interest in cybersecurity, which I assume everybody here does. And we also have a page on CISA.gov/China, where we are putting all of our sort of threat information, and then, of course, the important mitigation guidance. But I think this is the threat that we need to pay the most attention to, because given the formidable nature, the capability, how well-resourced, how sophisticated Chinese cyber actors are, and this, of course, is something that other folks in the government, in particular Chris Wray, has talked about, I think it will be extraordinarily difficult, notwithstanding our abilities to try and do it, to detect those actors in all of our networks. And so not only do we have to be prepared from a cybersecurity capability perspective, but also we have to be prepared for the disruptions. We have to train so that we can put in place manual overrides. We have backups. We are exercising so that we can recover in a way that mitigates the risk to the nation. And as I served as the head of resilience at Morgan Stanley, and the way that we put resilience into place at a major financial firm is different than how we thought about building a cybersecurity capability. It was really all about identifying our critical business services and exercising and planning and exercising so that we could actually recover from significant disruptions. And frankly, I think that's the way we need to look at things now as we contemplate the very significant threat from China.
Good point. And tangential to that, of course, is the ongoing threat that we do or could still face from Russia. And we can't leave this discussion without talking about, you and I, of course, are both Star Trek fans, and your Shields Up program, and
exactly.
what you urged there when we worry about blowback from our support from the Ukraine invasion, right, when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, because of course we, Chris Inglis and I wrote the note about an op-ed about Shields Up has to be the new normal. We have to continue to raise the bar on our cybersecurity for critical infrastructure, because cybersecurity is national security. And so the things that we put in place as part of that campaign are all still as relevant today to business leaders, to businesses, to CISOs, and then, of course, to individuals about what we need to do to stay safe online. And just because we have not seen significant malicious cyber activity directed against our critical infrastructure from the Russians, and there are many theories behind why, I think it's sort of a success of deterrence, both deterrence by punishment, given a fear of escalation based on the warnings that the president gave to Putin, but also deterrence by denial, because of all the work that critical infrastructure did in a very urgent way to shore up their cybersecurity. So I think it's a positive news story, but I think just as we think about the threats that we talked about through the Nationwide Shields Up campaign, we need to think about the threats from China in the same way and be prepared as a nation to be able to withstand those significant threats going forward.
Completely agree. I'm not sure how much time we have left. Looking for Megan to give me so somebody will give me the hook when we're getting close to the time. But let me talk about another thing that's important. Obviously, earlier this year, you were kind enough to join me at Brown University and were guest speaker for one of my the class I was teaching on cybersecurity. And in that, you spoke about the need for more secure technology products, especially as it relates to protecting Americans from the threat actors you just mentioned. Can you share the latest on these efforts and how we can help secure the .gov mission? And what can technology manufacturers do to advance secure by design?
Yeah. Thanks for this. Folks may have seen Eric Goldstein, who's my head of cybersecurity. I think he's talking later today. He and I wrote an article in Foreign Affairs and it published in early February, which was about how do we have a sustainable approach to cybersecurity. Every year we talk about how bad the cyber threat actors are, how the bar is being lowered for cyber criminals, how rogue nations are getting more sophisticated, and then we talk about cybercrime as 6.5 trillion, 8 trillion, 12 trillion. And frankly, it just seems like it's getting worse and worse and worse. And so, at the end of the day, things like cyber hygiene are incredibly important, for businesses and for individuals, but we are not going to cyber hygiene our way out of this threat that we're dealing with. So part of what we argued is to be in a more sustainable posture to defend the nation in cyber, we need to actually move further upstream instead of focusing on just the patching, just the instantiation of enterprise multi-factor authentication. We need to move upstream to actually when the technology is designed and when it's deployed. And that's the theory of the case behind Secure by Design. We have, over the past few months, since you graciously asked me to join your class at Brown, we've made a lot of good progress on that. In April, we put out a product along with 6 other nations, the FBI and NSA, on principles and approaches for Secure by Design, how to test, deploy products that reduce the number of exploitable vulnerabilities, and then products that are secure by default, products that come out of the box with the right security features in terms of logging and MFA and single sign-on. And we've gotten fantastic feedback on that, to include from industry, that are working very closely with us as we look to implement the 3 principles we talked about. The first is that technology companies and software manufacturers must take responsibility for the security and safety outcomes of their end users. And so this is very consonant. You mentioned the National Cyber Strategy. One of the big themes is shifting the burden to those who can most bear it from those who can least bear it. And so owning the security and safety outcomes of their consumers is number one. Second, technology companies must embrace radical transparency to provide data on what they're doing to create more safe and secure products, so that we're actually building a signal, a market signal, so consumers and individuals and businesses know what to ask for. And then finally, that this needs to be a business level decision. It can't be us security people, us technical people fighting for all of this. This really needs to be pushed from the top down because it's the right thing to do for consumers. And so we well recognize that we are fighting against sort of decades of a perfect storm where you have no regulation, you have technology companies that are able to produce products and then expect consumers and businesses to bolt on security at the as an after piece. And that's why, of course, we have a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity industry, and frankly, a culture of blaming the victim. Now, certainly businesses should take responsibility if they failed to do things that they should do. But at the end of the day, the technology companies should have responsibility as well. Yeah. If you are producing something that constantly needs to be patched, it is not trivial to do that. In a big bank, patching an enterprise is actually a pretty serious endeavor because you're worried you might break things and you need to open for business in Asia in the morning. And so there's a window there where you can actually patch effectively. And so we really think it's important that technology manufacturers bear the burden here, that consumers know what secure by design, what secure by default is, so they can ask the right questions, and that business leaders take responsibility for this as a business decision. And as the other thing we wrote about in that article, they really embrace corporate cyber responsibility as a matter of good governance and how they are managing cyber risk, both to their company as well as to the nation. And so we're particularly excited about making some progress on this. We have a Secure by Design Summit that we're holding internally on Friday. We hope to publish our next version of the document later this summer. We've got more international partners joining us. We've got industry partners joining us. And so I think we're going to make some headway on this, but it is not an easy thing, as you know.
No, but an important effort to undertake. It's a great way for us to kind of wrap up our discussion. Maybe we'll ask for maybe one or two questions from the audience if we have time. But absolutely agree with focusing on secure by design. Military terms, we talk about how we want to go as far left of boom as possible, and that's what that would get us to. And I think the national cyber strategy was right on point, shifting the burden from those who are least capable to those who are most capable to defend. And right now we have clearly when we go to when new software is put out, there's a rush to market versus secure to market. Yeah. So we need to change that paradigm, and I think focusing more on secure by design will help us to get there.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Congressman and Director Easterly. And I just wanted to jump in quickly. We have got about 10 minutes left. So we did want to see if we could field a couple questions from our intrepid audience here. Scott, I see your hand went up first.
Do we have a microphone?
Yeah, we have a microphone for you.
Hi, Scott Cooper. I'm with Peraton. I've got a two-part question. One, I'd like to talk about just the data and how you share that, about the data. I mean, how you share that. I mean, a cyber attack, some kind of malicious behavior, doesn't just create an alert. And so certainly you are an advocate of the joint collaborative environment. How we share that among the various agencies is really important. And I'd love just your thoughts on how you think about that. Second part is it true that you really wanted to go to the Naval Academy?
No. It is absolutely not true. It's a great question. And, I know this is about federal cybersecurity, but I probably failed to talk enough about federal cybersecurity because it is a fantastic news story. So let me hit a couple things. You mentioned SolarWinds and what has been done over the last 2.5 years. A lot of it came out of the American Rescue Plan Act, some of the authorities. What we discovered at CISA in SolarWinds was sort of three fundamental things. First, we didn't have the visibility to understand what was going on across the civilian.gov. Two, we didn't have the ability to ingest, analyze, and make sense of and take action on the data, even if we were able to see it. And three, we did not have the right partnerships to enable us to share that data effectively so that we could really manage the FSEB as an enterprise and reduce risk to it. And so over the past 2.5 years, a few of the things that we did to get after those issues, first of all, on the visibility piece, just a massive transformation. So through some of the funding we got, through the programs, ARPA, as well as some of the new authorities, we were able to create through the CDM program, Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, a dashboard that essentially gives us a real-time view of what is now happening across the FSEB. So not only can we see whether vulnerabilities exist, but we can actually alert and ensure that they are being mitigated nearly in real time, which is something that we were completely blind during SolarWinds, and now we can actually see down to the endpoints. We can also hunt on those endpoints, which increases significantly that ability to be able to understand the data that's happening across all of that. And so the other thing that we have that's given us that enhances that visibility and that data sharing is, you mentioned the BODs. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of the team is the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities BOD, which essentially helps FSEB, but really businesses now use it to prioritize how they mitigate vulnerabilities. And there's thousands and thousands of these things, but if you know which ones were actively exploited, it gives you a way to actually allocate resources there. And so we can see now that through the dashboards, through CDM, that we have mitigated more than 12 million of the vulnerabilities illuminated by the KEV list, which I think is pretty remarkable. So the visibility is there. We also have that visibility that's coming through the significant transformation from government-provided technology that was really legacy to commercial shared services, which has made a huge difference. So we have protective DNS that we instantiated in September of last year that has helped us mitigate, I think, 12 million of the connections to malicious websites. So that visibility is incredible. And then what we are doing, to your point on the JCE, and we did receive good funding from this in the hack markup, is the ability to now build what's called the CADs, the Cyber Analytic Data Services. And that will allow CISA to bring in all of this data that we now have visibility on, to analyze it, to make sense of it, and then to very rapidly take action. And that is the foundation of the JCE, which we are already building, which will allow us to take data from our federal partners and our industry partners and give us that vision of a data lake that will then allow us to very rapidly make sense and act on that data in a way that we haven't had before. And so we're very excited about this work as we continue it. We just announced the hire of somebody to help us do this great work as part of mission engineering, so really focused on the CADs. And then on the data sharing piece, I think it's really important to recognize the work that you did that eventually gave us the JCDC, started out at the JCPO, but the JCDC, the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative, is really a transformation of public-private partnership. And it's a recognition that, frankly, that had become a hackneyed term. And what we really needed was something predicated on a default to share information, recognizing that a threat to one is a threat to all. A recognition that government and industry must be co-equal partners with reciprocal expectations of transparency, responsiveness, and need for the government to add value, and need for industry not to fear sanction when they share information about a threat. And then finally, a recognition that you really need that interaction from a data sharing perspective to be as frictionless as possible. So you want shared analytic platforms. Something as simple, for example, as Slack that we used during the Shields Up campaign to share information very quickly on Russian malicious cyber activity. So both from a technical perspective, Scott, and then also from an organizational perspective, I think we've made incredible strides in both the visibility piece, but also the ability to make sense of the data and to share it in an agile way. Thanks for the question.
And I also mention one of the other things that's got tangential also this is the authority that Congress is able to give to CISA for the administrative subpoena authority, that if you saw a vulnerability before, you couldn't act on it because the contractual obligations of a company wouldn't allow that information to be shared, and now you can.
That's terrific as well. And that was a really good news story. I mean, we had a lot of support from folks like Senator Wyden, who appreciated what we were trying to do. And we worked in a very robust way with the privacy and civil liberties community. We have a fantastic privacy officer named James Bird, and just a wonderful team on that. So it was a very good news story.
Absolutely.
Excellent. I think we've got time for maybe one more question. Yes, in the back.
Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Frizecki. I do human rights work for women dealing with violence, and I've been following the work that you've been doing with the Cyber Solarium work. And in the work that I do, there's a range of cyber vulnerability that is not being addressed. When you look at violence against women, there is a huge amount of cyber harassment that goes on. And I think that it would indicate the level and the amount that goes on has not been studied, the data has not been collected. And I think that if it were to be studied, it would show that there is an enormous range of vulnerability. It's like an entire context of vulnerability that's not being looked at, that I think really we should address and start looking at. It's not being addressed at all, so I'd like to bring that up. Thank you.
I think one thing worth mentioning, and this was announced recently at the Summit for Democracy as part of our JCDC planning agenda, we have a high-risk community protection initiative Actually, it's a little bit different from what you just mentioned, but I think it's pretty exciting in our ability to work with civil society, who are often most vulnerable and targeted with things like spyware. We've seen this with Pegasus from NSO Group. And so working with that community to identify how we can better protect them and what the best practices are. So we are doing a piece of that through JCDC, a piece of that through our Technical Advisory Council with great folks. That's actually led by Jeff Moss on our subcommittee of our CSAC, along with fantastic people like Runa Sandvik, who's a real terrific person in the human rights community. And so I'm very excited about what we're going to be doing there. And so it doesn't hit on that specifically, but it does touch on those very vulnerable communities who are targeted with these kinds of capabilities that we really want to help.
Great. And I think with that, maybe just a couple minutes of closing thoughts or comments for this audience.
Director, I'll turn it over to you. It's been a pleasure teaming up with you once again. A great discussion. But any last words that you have?
No, I just really appreciate the opportunity. I really appreciate your leadership and your partnership. You know, I often say that CISA is the best agency to work at. I've spent a lot of time in different places in the government. I spent 21 years in the military, a lot of that time downrange, Iraq, Afghanistan, and others, time at the White House, time in the intelligence community. And the great thing about CISA is that we are purpose-built to be a partnership agency. And so every day we wake up with the viewpoint that we are going to add value to a partnership. We are going to be of service to the nation, to the American people, to be able to defend ourselves in this very difficult cyber threat environment. And so it is a fantastic mission, and I always appreciate the opportunity to evangelize for CISA. And I would just say that if you are not already partnering with us in some way, shape, or form, please do so. We have great folks who are all over the country and who want to partner with you. So thanks for everything that you do. Thanks, Megan, for hosting, and it's great to be with you. Thanks, Jim.
Well, clearly you are the right person, the right place at the right time. I share your passion for CISA, and the nation's lucky to have you leading that organization.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.